I'm Bryan Littlefair. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer of Venari Security. In my past lives, I've been the Global Chief Information Security Officer for Vodafone Group, the same role for Aviva, 20-year career in security coming up through the ranks, and I run my own company, Cambridge Cyber Advisors. So I think, Venari Security has a really interesting product. Having led security teams around the world, I recognize the challenge that it's trying to fix. Encrypted traffic is the future. We have to recognize that. More and more of our traffic is being encrypted, and only really the Venari Security's products give you those insights into the threat and risks of what can be present within encrypted traffic that your other tools are blind to. Venari Security has a really high level of talent wrapped around a very experienced internal management team. So thinking about all of the advisors, the seniority of them, the companies that they've ran, the security teams and that they've been responsible for. It's a great think tank of ideas to support the organization internally. So I think boards and executive teams, so obviously the executive team, the CEO and his direct reports, and then the board who actually govern the CEO and the rest of the organization, their approach to security has changed over recent times as well. They've seen the impact and they've seen the brands and the logos that have been negatively impacted and affected by cybersecurity incidents. And instead of taking a reactive stance, i.e. get breached, put out a statement saying we take security seriously and then invest heavily to make sure it doesn't happen again, they're taking a proactive approach. So thinking through how do we proactively measure our threat and risk exposure and invest before the incident actually happens. So I think the Chief Information Security Officer in a mature organization that takes security seriously will have a seat at the boardroom table, not as a member, but as an attendee, certainly on a monthly basis, to be able to communicate where security is going. I think that's absolutely essential, and be able to guide the boardroom in terms of the threats and risks that they're facing and what the mitigations or measures they should be putting in place to actively manage the threat and risks that the company is facing. So from a security professional's perspective, the prevention is definitely better than the cure. We want to be proactive. We want to stop incidents happening. But equally, we have to recognize that no organization is 100% fully protected. Security incidents will always happen. So we should be judged on our ability to detect and rapidly mitigate security incidents rather than to stop them happening in the first place. So I think historically, the challenge that's been presented to security teams from an encryption perspective is it is always possible to break the encryption, but it's the latency that you add to the traffic flows in terms of doing that. So historically, for example, organizations would pull all of their encrypted traffic to a decryption point, decrypt it, inspect it, re-encrypt it, and then send it out the organization. That decryption time can break sensitive flows between applications because they're very time sensitive. And I think the benefit of Venari Security is you don't have to decrypt. You can inspect that traffic for threats and risks and compliance violations without actually decrypting the traffic, which improves the latency and the flow through the network. So I think the biggest threats that organizations are facing today is what we call the digital pandemic, which is crypto malware, which ironically is encryption. So malware gets into the organization, put there by an individual, and the objective is to initially steal the data and then encrypt all of the IT systems, computers, laptops, servers, etc., so that they're unusable by the end user. So the bad guys hold the key and they're not going to decrypt it until you actually pay them some form of ransom. And I think that's the biggest threat that organizations are facing today. So I think the role of the Chief Information Security Officer has changed drastically over the last 10 or 15 years. If I think back to when I was first Chief Information Security Officer of Vodafone, it was a very technology-faced role. You were reporting within the technology function. You were primarily focused on putting technical tools out there. The evolution that I've seen is it's become a business-facing risk and a business-facing role. So yes, you need a technology background. You need to understand that. But to effectively manage the risk of the organization, you have to work with business stakeholders, speak the business language, the language of the boardroom, risk and finance, and be able to leverage business stakeholders outside of the technology function. So the CISO is essentially becoming a chief risk officer role. I think the cyber malware threat that we're all facing. It's ubiquitous. It doesn't matter if you're a large organization or a small to medium enterprise. We've seen attacks against schools, hospitals, large multinationals. It's a bit indiscriminate, but it's very targeted. So, cyber insurance definitely plays a role in this. So in some instances, the people that are attacking you know how much cyber insurance that you have and know that you have a policy in place. And equally, that is seen to be one of the fueling elements for the crypto malware threat that we're all facing at the moment. So I think security leaders recognize that you can't protect absolutely everything and recognize that security incidents are always going to happen. So the big focus for us is to rapidly detect when something goes incorrect or a breach is actually occurring, and actually equally rapidly mitigate that incident. So all of our focus is how do we get the technologies, the people and the process in place to actually detect those incidents as quickly as possible and restore the business to normal operation. So I think most security incidents that we see in organizations by design happen on a Friday night or over a weekend or when you're at the farmer's market with your children. I can say that from personal experience, simply because they want to attack an organization when they've got the least amount of expertise that can rapidly focus on the resolution. They know that people are off with their families, etc., so they come at you then. They will have been inside your organization before that. You haven't detected them, but they actually launched the attack to cripple the organization at that point. So Christmas and the hot Christmas holiday period, wherever you are in the world, can be a challenge for security professionals. Like we said before, attacks are typically launched when security professionals are enjoying holiday time or relaxing with their families. So Christmas Day is a very popular time, and Boxing Day, to launch security attacks against organizations. So I think the perfect CISO for 2022 actually is very attuned into the threats and risk angles. So you have to understand the operational environment that your business is focused in. You have to be very technology savvy. Security is a numbers game, and you have to be able to crunch those numbers with technology and tooling. And then you have to be a very effective communicator, being able to communicate what you require the business to do in order to maintain its security. So I think what keeps the CISO awake at night. Number one is they're there to protect customer data. That's their ultimate objective of what they're sitting in an organization to do. So anything that's going to negatively impact that's going to keep them awake at night. But I think the biggest threat is crypto malware, and it's often in the media that we're battling teens in bedrooms, etc. And in some cases we are, but in the majority of cases we're fighting very well-funded, very well-skilled security people that actually have exactly the same skills, exactly the same techniques as our internal security teams. They just have a different motivation. So we're fighting, almost our exact opposites, and that's one of the biggest challenges that we face. So I think, looking back 10 or 15 years, a typical security team in a large organization would be hidden behind speed gates for security reasons and wouldn't be interacting with the broader business very much. Now, everyone is outside of the office, integrated with the various different organizations, and therefore the security leader has to do the same. So no longer can you be in your ivory tower, as we used to call it. You have to be very comfortable in communicating with the board. You have to be very comfortable in communicating with business stakeholders, because you have to influence the way that they work in order to improve the security of the organization. So I think large, complex, multinational organizations find managing internal certificates, TLS certificates, quite a challenge, simply because typically it's distributed into the operational teams within the organization, and that can be in 63 different countries. But actually when a certificate expires, the machine becomes untrusted and services can be automatically dropped off the network that are potentially customer facing. And I think what Venari can actually potentially do for organizations is to understand what is actually going on inside the organization from a TLS and certificate perspective, to give them the insights of, are they self-signed? Are they running out? What level of cipher are they using? And that, for a lot of times, that's the first time the security team will actually have had those insights. So I think, in encryption, we rely on certificates of trust. Each each component within the service chain will have a certificate sitting on it, and that will be signed by an external authority to actually show that that environment or that service is a trusted component within the chain of command. If a system or a server sitting within that, the certificate expires, the other machines will no longer trust it, and that can actually pull down a fundamental service that's customer facing. I think the challenge with telecoms is you're more the vehicle that they use to attack other organizations. Because if you think about it, the traffic's going over your network. So if they're attacking, I don't know, Bank A or Bank B, and you're British Telecom, they're using your pipes to attack the bank. It's actually going over your network. So it's, you have a role to play in mitigating that attack. So that even though the bank isn't, even though you're not being targeted, your infrastructure is being used as part of that attack, right? So you have an accountability to be able to cut that off. So you might get a phone call from Barclays and say, we're being attacked. Can you cut it off in your network? So you stop it in the network. That's, you recognize that you play a role. The way I always thought about telecommunications is they're designed to get packets and information from A to B as quickly as possible. That includes bad traffic, right? So I've spent a lot of my career in telecommunications, running security for numerous different telecommunications organizations. And I think telecommunications companies have to recognize that in some cases they're playing a role as the transport mechanism for some of the attacks that are occurring on their customers. And more we want to add ourselves into that value chain to be able to stop those attacks in our bigger pipes before they reach the smaller pipes of our customers, who are the intended target of that attack. And I think certainly in the UK, Europe and US, people are legislating that telecommunications companies have to do more to be able to understand the types of traffic that are traversing their network, to be able to better protect not just enterprise customers, but equally broadband and fibre consumers as well. So I think boards and executive teams, so obviously the executive team, the CEO and his direct reports, and then the board who actually govern the CEO and the rest of the organization, their approach to security has changed over recent times as well. They've seen the impact and they've seen the brands and the logos that have been negatively impacted and affected by cybersecurity incidents. And instead of taking a reactive stance, i.e. get breached, put out a statement saying we take security seriously and then invest heavily to make sure it doesn't happen again, they're taking a proactive approach. So thinking through how do we proactively measure our threat and risk exposure and invest before the incident actually happens. So I think one of the challenges that organizations face is just being able to detect what's going on their network. So security operations centers come in play, but in some instances they have billions of events flowing into them on a daily basis. And it's about how do you actually cut the noise down to find out what's actually going on. We've seen in incidents and attacks, in some cases, the attackers have been on networks for over a year, undetected. So the big challenge is, how do you identify what's genuine authorized business activity on your network, and how do you stop or how do you detect those anomalies as quickly as possible? Yeah, so there's a whole piece around, if you're maxed out completely, which everyone says, you're very tactically focused, so you're fighting the fires of today rather than focusing strategically, which will actually extinguish all the stuff that you're working on today anyway. So it's about making sure that your security program is strategically focused rather than just tactical about the issues that you're facing today. So I think the mature security organizations of today have ensured that they're looking strategically focused. So they've understood the business priorities, they've understood the technology priorities of the organization, they've understood the direction the business is going, and they've designed a security program that protects them not only for today, but actually starts to look 2 and 3 years out into tomorrow. Organizations that are too tactically focused will just be firefighting for today and not be able to predict what's coming down the chain to attack them. It's inclination as well. I mean, it's where you're born. Like, so for example, Russia, North Korea, South Korea, all of those aspects. If you're in that, in a lot of countries you don't have a choice. You will use your skill for this requirement and need. So it's not all everyone going, I can make some money, but there are recruitment drives on the darknet to pull people from our side to that side, right? So they do actually try and recruit. Yeah, come over to the dark side and make millions rather than 60 grand that bank's paying you, right?
Yeah.
So I've done a lot of lecturing at universities. I've done a lot of lecturing at Warwick and others, talking to the cybersecurity graduates and PhD students. And what I've seen over the past 5 or 6 years is that audience changed drastically. From a start, it's grown significantly. So rather than just being a single track, quite often there's 3 tracks of lectures going on the same subject, because they can't fit everyone in the room, because everyone wants to become a cybersecurity professional now. But it's also the audience has changed. So from being a very male audience into great to see lots of females coming through, and equally lots of neurodiverse people as well coming into the cybersecurity field. And they add a lot of value to the security field as well. So personally, in my past, I've actively sought out and tried to recruit neurodiverse people into the security profession. Security is a thinking problem, and you want people that look at that problem from different mindsets and different perspectives. And I've found personally the value that they can add to the security profession has been of great value to me in my past. Any good security operations center wants neurodiverse people in there, people with autism, people with dyslexia, because they analyze the data from a different mindset and approach. So I used to have one guy in my SOC in Vodafone, Germany. You couldn't touch him or shake his hand or anything, but he was an amazing analyst. So I think there's a very well publicized global skills shortage in cybersecurity. So wherever you look, the number changes, but certainly several hundred thousands of roles unfilled throughout the globe. So there's a huge requirement to pull people into the cybersecurity profession. It's seen as a very sexy position at the moment in terms of, you're fighting real world challenges. You do all of the IT pieces that other people in IT do, but equally you've got this, extra really cool piece of activity that you've got to do to protect an organization when it's being attacked. So I think a lot of people look at that and think, yeah, that'll be a really interesting job to do. Sounds a cliche, but every day is different in cybersecurity, right?